I'm excited to tell you the story of how I was introduced to Agile and how Agile ideas helped transform my work experience. I love my job and I love the people I work with, but it was not always that way. I hope by sharing some of my experiences, you can transform your place of work into something you love. I know that an Agile transformation is not always successful. It's hard because in many cases, we have to change the way we think. Many times it requires resisting our human nature. Two challenges I have for you today are to take the risk of placing trust in others, don't fall prey to distrust, and resist the urge to hold on to power. To release authority, don't hold on to power with a closed fist, but take an open-hand approach. I truly believe if you can do these things, which is kind of contrary to human instinct, the results will be satisfying. After a brief story of how I drank the Kool-Aid to become an Agile evangelist, I'll focus on two key components to an Agile transformation. Those components are trust and transparency. And for each of these topics, you'll learn what it is, why it's important, and how to get it. I'll sprinkle some examples in along the way as well. So before I jump into the topic of trust, let me introduce myself and tell you the story of Blueprint and its Agile transformation. My name is Mark French, and I'm the CEO of Blueprint Education. Blueprint is a nonprofit corporation that operates 2 charter schools in Arizona. The organization was established in 1969. I've worked for Blueprint for over 30 years, and during those decades, I've seen good times and bad. I became CEO in 2014, but this Agile journey begins well before 2014. I mentioned highs and lows for Blueprint. Well, 2005 happened to be one of those low times. However, that was the year that I was introduced to Agile. Agile in the context of organizational management was really intriguing to me. The emphasis on teamwork and the prioritization of building a culture of trust and ownership resonated with me, especially since at the time I was working in an opposite environment. I was a leader at Blueprint Education, but it was a suffocating and toxic place to work. Soon after that initial introduction, I attended several classes that taught the basics of Scrum. I read some books and lots of articles on the topic. At the time, I had a few people who reported to me. Together, we agreed to give Scrum a try. This experiment was just within our area. The rest of the organization did not adopt Scrum. Agile felt right to me as a staff member. I did not like the command and control culture at Blueprint, and Agile addressed those concerns. Beyond the work environment, I could see how the typical high school student was stuck in a command and control culture too. Our students were facing the same corporate structure problems and having the same negative feelings about school that I had about work. Education, like work, should not be drudgery. It should be empowering and fun. A pivotal moment occurred when I attended the Global Scrum Gathering in Atlanta in 2014. As an educator attending a technology conference, I was sure I would be on the outside looking in. What I experienced was a large group of people from very diverse professions who welcomed me. I was inspired by that meeting, and I learned a great deal and made some great connections. So I was learning Agile and practicing Scrum. I ran into many challenges, but remained faithful to an axiom that I learned from an Agile coach. If the Scrum process does not seem to work, take a moment to see if it's pointing out a weakness in your organizations before you decide Scrum doesn't work for me. To this day, I hold true to that assumption that if there's an issue, trust that the answer is not to modify Scrum. I've just shared how I was introduced to Agile. Now I'd like to tell you about Blueprint Education's story. As I mentioned, Blueprint Education is a nonprofit operating charter schools in Arizona. A charter is a public school that's funded by attendance, and it's held accountable to the state for student achievement, attendance, and graduation. We have both online and in-person schools. They're all high schools. Blueprint Education's culture was typical of many other organizations. Employees did not share their true thoughts and feelings with leadership. We went through all the motions that were expected of a good organization, but in truth, the meetings were a waste of time, and the leaders protected their turf before having any concern about what was best for the company and the students that we serve. Factions were present within the organization. In short, the typical work environment. We just accepted that this is the way things are. In 2014, Blueprint Education was failing by all measures. Financially, we had suffered several consecutive years of financial loss. Most of our reserves were gone, and we were facing our biggest financial loss ever in that year. If that's not enough, academically, our schools were not meeting standards for student achievement. And under those circumstances, our former CEO resigned. I got my chance to apply for the Agile principles to the entire organization in March 2014 when I was selected by the board of directors to be the new CEO. My first step was to identify key leaders in the organization and facilitate development of a shared vision. As our leadership team moved through Tuckman stages, we were influenced by both the Agile and Scrum values. I mentioned that I drank the Kool-Aid. Well, here's the Kool-Aid. The Agile Manifesto and its subset framework, Scrum, both serve our company well through the Agile transformation. The Agile concepts and the Scrum framework were key factors in transforming Blueprint education from command and control to trust and transparency. The 4 values of the Agile Manifesto ring true in my experience. Those 4 values are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Embracing the human element of an enterprise, which is individuals and interactions over processes and tools, aligns with my desire to make work more than a place to get things done, but a place to unlock the vast potential of humans that is generally closed off due to lack of trust. Trust leads to creativity and innovation. Scrum is one of the most popular frameworks for Agile, and it's the one Blueprint has adopted. The 5 Scrum values are focus, openness, respect, commitment, and courage. Everything I mentioned to you is rooted in the Agile and Scrum values. As we began to implement changes centered around Agile concepts, Blueprint education roared back from the brink of bankruptcy and academic failure. Now we're financially sound with reserves in the bank, and the school, targeted to be closed in 2014, now has a grade of B. The amazing transformation was inspired by an unwavering commitment to trust and a prioritization of team transparency. I've endured some pretty negative experiences at work. My dislike of a work environment filled with distrust has made me hyper-aware of the importance of trust. If you value individuals and interactions, you're saying you believe in trust. Trust is important to unlocking creativity. I mentioned earlier that I would cover the concept by answering 3 questions. What is it? Why do you need it? And how do you get it? So what is trust? Google researchers studied effective teams in their Project Aristotle. That research identified 5 factors of an effective team. The primary factor they identified is psychological safety, and that's just a fancy word for trust. The Center for Creative Leadership defines psychological safety in this way. It is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. It's a shared belief held by members of a team that others on the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish you for speaking up. David Ullman, the center's chief operating officer, says, when you have psychological safety in the workplace, people feel comfortable being themselves. They bring their full selves to work and they feel okay laying all of themselves on the line. The definition of trust is the firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone. Dr. Stephen Covey writes in The Speed of Trust, the difference between high and low trust is palpable. He says, take communication, for example. In a high trust relationship, you can say the wrong thing and people will still get the meaning. In a low trust relationship, you can be very measured, even precise, and they'll still misrepresent you. Why do you need trust? When a team has trust, productivity and creativity flourish. When you don't, progress is slow. So Google, the Center for Creative Leadership, and Stephen Covey all agree, trust is important. An Agile culture must have trust so people feel safe to give their best without fear of embarrassment. In a culture of trust, people do not hold back. Teams are more resilient to challenges and organization is more effective. The writer Andy Stanley introduced the phrase, put trust in the gap. The concept is often referenced in our organization. I think he has some answers for how do we get it. Mr. Stanley explains that in organizations, when you work together, at some point, there will be a gap between your expectations and results. What happens when this gap occurs will impact the culture of an organization. For example, a colleague shows up to a meeting scheduled for 9 at 9:15. Your expectation was for them to show up on time. The results are that the colleague is late. Now you have a gap between what happened and what was expected. You can choose to put either trust or suspicion in the gap. A truly agile organization will strive to put trust in the gap. Interestingly, in his book, Advantage, Patrick Lencioni writes about the fundamental attribution error, and that is that humans tend to blame others' mistakes on personal character flaws while they blame our own mistakes on pure environmental conditions. For example, she's late to the meeting because she's lazy and selfish, but I'm late to the meeting because traffic was bad. I'm sure you can imagine a more significant situation beyond being late to a meeting when someone you rely on does not meet your expectations. To build an organization of trust, I challenged our teams to resist our natural human tendencies and place trust in the gap rather than suspicion. The emphasis is that placing trust in the gap is a choice. You can choose to have that as a part of your team agreements. In addition, we challenge each team member to be a trustworthy person. I do not mean perfect. When you cause a gap, own it and don't wait to fix it. Great employees own their mistakes and fix them. I'm sure you're thinking about the practical application of this principle. We cannot just be blind Pollyannas. When trust runs out, I lead our teams to talk to the person who created the gap. If a gap continues to emerge, the conversation must turn to the person's fit in the organization. If you cannot trust, you must confront quickly and fairly. At Blueprint, we have committed to 4 actions. When there's a gap, I will choose to believe the best. When others assume the worst about you, I will assume the best. If what I experience erodes my trust, I will go directly to you first. And when I know I will not be able to deliver on a promise, when I cause a gap, I'll come and tell the truth. Blueprint's success does not depend on perfection. We can survive mistakes, but we will thrive in a culture of trust. We must learn to trust each other and strive to be a person who can be trusted. Today, as a result of building trust, our leaders at Blueprint Education share their struggles and successes freely in a trusted setting of the team. Our team has agreed that discussions about sensitive issues can be frank, and what was spoken about will not go beyond the room. It requires small initial investments of vulnerability that were handled well by the team. Over time, those small steps have led to greater psychological safety, resulting in a highly productive team. I know it's not easy, but for the cause of building trust, I encourage you to commit to create an environment of psychological safety by putting trust in the gap, and inspire each team member to strive to be a trustworthy person. I mentioned that our agile transformation was from command and control to trust and transparency. Having discussed trust, I'd like to spend a few minutes on the topic of transparency. You know, in Scrum, transparency is one of the 3 pillars, along with inspection and adaptation. So what is transparency? Transparency means free, unrestricted access to knowledge and information. Basically, it's the opposite of the typical corporate structure. It means the boss does not always exercise his or her authority. Transparency is open, honest, and accessible communication. Transparency essentially has 3 purposes: to provide information, to increase participation, and to hold leaders accountable. That last part is really scary. Hold leaders accountable? The natural human instinct is to do the opposite. As CEO, it's easier to be the boss and be free from accountability for my staff, but that short-term freedom bears a high cost to the organization. As a leader, I have to fight the urge to hold on to that power. So why do we need it? Transparency has played a key role in our agile transformation, and I think it's fundamental to any positive organizational change. An agile culture will prioritize transparency so teams can take ownership of corporate goals, resulting in purposeful and sound decisions. I need transparency because it invites everyone on the team to take ownership. They care about the outcomes as much as the owner. Transparency inspires teams to focus on corporate goals. They see and embrace the big picture. They're not solely focused on departmental goals because this is short-sighted. Transparency frees teams to make important decisions, and it gives teams true autonomy. Transparency is laying the sword of control at the feet of your teams. It is how a leader displays the Scrum value of commitment. With loss of control, the leadership gains more minds working to solve the problem, and freedom because the outcome does not all ride on your shoulders. Transparency gives teams autonomy. It gives them the autonomy they need to be effective. Otherwise, they're just a group of people working for a boss. You can achieve transparency, and I'm answering the question now about how you get it, by overcoming the fear of loss of control. At Blueprint, our practical application of this concept is to encourage decentralized decision-making. A common phrase in our organization is those closest to the action will make the best decisions. As you empower teams, you need to give them tools to make sound decisions. One such tool is the elimination of waste in planning. It's critical to teach decentralized teams that planning must take a backseat to doing. This can be mitigated by placing the focus on learning over planning. The idea ties closely with the concepts of lean originally applied to manufacturing by Toyota. Eric Ries opened my eyes to the application of lean in relation to planning. Detailed, long-term planning should be considered waste. This is the ultimate reversal of the agile value responding to change over following a plan. If you are not thoughtful, you can become committed to executing a plan without asking if it gets us where we want to go. At Blueprint, our biggest opportunity to display the value of transparency came early in my role as CEO. The authorizing agency for charter schools in Arizona is the Arizona State Board for Charter Schools. In May 2014, just 2 months after I became CEO, that board notified me of their intent to close one of our schools. Now, some people may decide to hide news like this from the rank and file employees. I knew we needed everyone on staff to assist in reversing the board's decision. I had to resist the temptation to act like I have it all under control. Can't fool very many people for long anyway. But being transparent takes the pressure off of me and allows other people to step in and contribute. It transforms the culture to learning rather than being right. We enlisted the help of every employee from all of our schools and at all levels to do the work necessary to save the school. We were able to convince the State Board for Charter Schools that our new direction represented real change for Blueprint Education that would produce results. They decided not to close the school. I work to model transparency in all matters. Regarding transparency, I encourage you to focus on 4 actions. Overcome the fear to hold on to power. Give free, unrestricted access to knowledge and information. Place trust in the team and give your team the tools they need to make good decisions. It's my strong desire that the principles I've shared can help you transform your work or school into a more trusting, transparent environment. My hope is that you can transform it into something you love. I recognize that every situation is unique and your path may look very different. I encourage you to find people who share your dream for a place that supports autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Even if they're outside your organization, they can be a great source of inspiration and encouragement and practical advice. Learn all you can about agile transformations and applications of agile or scrum in your industry. Take the risk of placing trust in others. Work to create a culture of trust so people feel safe to give their best without fear of embarrassment. You'll be rewarded with people who give their best to the cause and teams that are resilient and effective. Resist the urge to hold on to power. Prioritize transparency so teams can take ownership, resulting in purposeful and sound decisions, where the focus is on learning over being right. Take small, incremental steps. As others see your progress, their eyes will be opened to the possibilities and enthusiasm will grow. With a little luck and lots of hard work, you can transform your work experience from command and control to trust and transparency.